俺の悪いとこ教えてよ。俺はこの先どうしたらもっともっと売れるの。
いや
僕じゃあ僕が性の抑制性の抑制を自分でコントロールできたらもう一つ上のまっちゃんが現れると思う。エロいことばっか考えてないでずっとエロいこと考えてる。
変わってなかったですね、松本さん。
In 2013, my mother was able to visit Japan for the first time. By then, I have already arrived in Japan a year prior for college, and was thus determined to show my mother around Tokyo to the best of my abilities for the few days while she was in the city. It is the least that she deserved. As a single mother, she raised me by herself, while also working in a career full-time, and the very least that I could do for her was to show her around the city where I was now living in, and help her leave Tokyo with the best of memories. So in the next few days of our visit, I created a rather packed touring schedule, visiting the notable places around the city, such as the Meiji Shrine in Harajuku, the temples in Asakusa, ride the Yurikamome line to Odaiba. Just what I thought, at least back then, were the places that should be visited by someone who visited Japan's capital city for the first time. And one of the places where we visited was Roppongi Hills. Roppongi Hills is a rather bougie complex that has shops, restaurants, cafes, apartments and the likes, in the middle of Tokyo's wealthiest ward of the Minato ward. And I wanted my mother to try the famous cakes at the Harps Cafe that I've read about online, which also has a store located inside the Roppongi Hills. Now, as many of our subscribers already know of my background of being a broke undergraduate on a government scholarship when I first entered Japan, when I brought my mother to Roppongi Hills, it was, quite unsurprisingly, the very first time when I visited the place as well. And I know that it can sound somewhat shallow, but when I first witnessed the Roppongi Hills area, being the naive 18-year-old that I was back in 2013, everything just seemed so beautiful for my lack of eloquence. The type of lifestyle that people around the area seemed to enjoy just looked so tear-inducingly beautiful, especially when seen at that time in my life. My life in Tokyo until then only consisted of literally the Waseda campus, my part-time workplaces, such as the Korean restaurant where I washed dishes, or the Tokyo Metro subways, where I did underground construction work after the midnight hours, and my dorm in Kasai, a working-class neighborhood in Tokyo that is bordering the Chiba prefecture, almost the polar opposite from the opulence of the Roppongi Hills. So when I saw all this bouginess for the first time in Tokyo, again combine that with an easily impressionable 18-year-old brain, I was just mesmerized at how life could be so good for the people who have so-called made it in Japan. People around the area all had this relaxed and sophisticated aura to them, far from the rough, beaten up in life attitude of the people in Tokyo whom I knew back from my part-time work in the kitchen of the Korean restaurant and the construction workers. And for any of our subscribers who have walked around the Roppongi Hills complex before, you'll know that the famous Grand Hyatt Tokyo is located there, as well as the Roppongi Hills Residence Towers that is commonly regarded as one of the most, if not the most expensive tower mansion to live in all of Japan, literally just a few steps outside of the main shopping mall. So although I cringe now thinking back on it when the memories sometimes pop up in my head before going to sleep, but I most vividly remember, just like yesterday, ambitiously telling my mother in this dopamine chart state while at the garden area of the Roppongi Hills residence that I'm going to make it in Japan and live in the residence tower at the Roppongi Hills. How when she visits me in Tokyo in a few years' time, I'll make her stay at the 5-star Grand Hyatt and not the APA Business Hotel where she stayed back in 2013. And long story short, I was able to get none of this done. Well, the part about making my mother stay at a 5-star hotel when she visited Tokyo, I did get this done, but it was not at the Hyatt in Roppongi. And knowing what I know now about the heinous-ass crimes that were regularly conducted up until very recently at the luxurious Grand Hyatt Hotel at Roppongi Hills, led by Matsumoto Hitoshi, I'm actually glad that I did not have my family stay anywhere near the rooms of where he committed his repeat-ass criminal offenses. But first of all, who exactly is Matsumoto Hitoshi? Ever since his debut all the way back in 1983 as one half of the comedy duo Downtown, he continued to rise to prominence in the Japanese entertainment industry, and by the time the mid-2000s arrived, his status has become so untouchable in the industry to the point that it became harder to not find the face of Matsumoto when you were going through the channels on Japanese television during the primetime hours. And this essentially made him, at least before all of the SSO allegations, one of the most, if not the most powerful comedian and TV personality in all of Japan for the past few decades. But then, on December 27th, 2023, life suddenly turned upside down for Matsumoto Hitoshi. Shukan Bunshun, a Japanese media outlet known for its investigative journalism, mostly acknowledged in the West for their part in first revealing the S-crimes in which Johnny Kitagawa, commonly regarded as the godfather of J-pop, has committed onto his minor male trainees for several decades, released an article which contained the interview of two of the alleged victims of Matsumoto, Miss A and Miss B. The contents within the article were indeed extremely shocking, and we're guessing that many in Japan who read the news for the very first time on the day probably had to rub their eyes a few times to confirm that what they were reading was indeed real life. Now, please keep in mind that the actual description of the S-crimes in which Matsumoto, as well as his fellow junior comedians, committed onto the dozens of his victims are just too explicit for YouTube, thus have to be described in a much milder way compared to the reality of the events, with the two extreme parts unfortunately needing to be omitted. We'll first describe the side of the story, as told by the dozens of female victims of Matsumoto spreading all across Japan, then go on to state the rebuttal conducted by Matsumoto and how the lawsuit in which Matsumoto has conducted in order to prove his innocence has ultimately ended up in. So without further ado, let us dive into today's video. In 2015, Miss A was a young woman in her early 20s who just signed herself to an entertainment agency and was motivated to work hard in Japan's capital city of Tokyo in order to make her dreams come true. Then a well-known comedian in Japan, Ozawa Kazuhiro of the comedy duo Speedwagon, who Miss A previously met at a work-related gathering, invited Miss A to a VIP drinking party at, you guessed it, the Grand Hyatt at Roppongi Hills. Ozawa warned her to not cancel at the last minute, as this was an important party containing VIPs. And only on the very day of the drinking party, Ozawa told Miss A that the party will not be held at the bar or at one of the fancy restaurants located inside the Grand Hyatt, where most drinking parties were usually held in, but rather in a private suite. Miss A, although feeling uneasy, still could not say no after hearing of this sudden change in location due to the fact that Ozawa warned her to not cancel at the last minute a few days prior. And when she went to the Grand Hyatt on the day and entered inside the room, she could clearly see that this was most likely the most expensive room in the hotel due to its sheer size and lavishness. And inside the room were two other young women, Ozawa and a television writer, X. Matsumoto has not yet arrived at the room at the time. Ozawa continued to amp up the three young women inside the room of how this amazing VIP was coming and sternly warned them to not be rude towards him, as if you do anything to upset him, you might not be able to step foot in the entertainment industry ever again. Then Ozawa confiscated all of the women's smartphones and put it in a bag next to the sofa. And around an hour later, this one and only VIP finally arrived. Not Watanabe Ken, not Sanada Hiroyuki, but the blonde-haired goblin of a man, Matsumoto Hitoshi. Matsumoto did not even acknowledge the three young women at the beginning and only talked to Ozawa and the television writer X for the first few minutes about work. Then as he drank more, he stopped ignoring the three women and asked them of what their occupations were, and so on. Then Matsumoto soon got to business, saying how the laws in Japan were effed up by not allowing a rich and powerful man, such as himself, to have lots of women and possess multiple wives. Then he went on to say how all three of the young women were totally acceptable from his part and asked, "Can you have my child? I'll pay child support and all that. Can you have my child?" All of the women, of course, said no. Then as time went on, the subordinate comedian Ozawa suddenly demanded that they all now play a game. The 3 young women and 3 men will play rock, paper, scissors, and the pair who gave the same hand will spend alone time together for 15 minutes. Matsumoto will be at the master bedroom, TV writer X will be in the bathroom, and Ozawa will be at the living room sofa. Miss A, most tragically, got the same hand as Matsumoto. Ozawa urged and pushed Miss A to the master bedroom where Matsumoto was at, telling her how this was an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to talk to him alone. But talking was not what Matsumoto wanted to do. Now, what happened inside the bedroom is far too graphic to be told exactly on YouTube. But essentially, Matsumoto got completely undressed, began kissing her without consent, then ripped off her shirt when she began to resist. Miss A states that Matsumoto repeatedly chanted, "Give birth to my child," like a spell while conducting all of his essay. Miss A was in a state of extreme panic and fear, and continued to plead by saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The infuriating thing is that when Miss A continued rejecting Matsumoto's assault, it was not Miss A who showed anger at the moment, but Matsumoto. Matsumoto got increasingly agitated with Miss A's refusal, in his delulu mind, most likely thinking, "How dare this commoner girl reject my kind offer to pass down my superior genes?" And Miss A says that she thought at that moment that she really could even have her life taken away from her if she continued to make him angry. So after the back and forth struggle, Miss A tragically had to be forced to satisfy Matsumoto, utilizing her hand and mouth. Then at the moment when Matsumoto had his moment, Ozawa, who was probably listening to everything that was happening inside the bedroom from the living room, shouted, "It's done." And Miss A was then immediately sent to the bathroom where the TV writer X was waiting. She says that this all happened within less than 10 seconds. And when Miss A went into the bathroom, another one of the young women at the drinking party was then also rotated into Matsumoto's bedroom. She was then molested inside the bathroom in a similar manner by the TV writer X until Matsumoto finished his criminal acts with the other young women at the party and was told to rotate. Then Miss A was rotated into the living room where Ozawa was at. Then Ozawa, seeing how traumatized Miss A was, apologized to her by saying how, to quote Ozawa's words, "Mr. Matsumoto's preferences are really strange. He doesn't like AV actresses or professional women, and he doesn't like fans either. He doesn't see any value in that." Then Ozawa also went to commit indescribable acts onto Miss A, and Miss A just frankly confesses that she at the time did not even have the energy to resist anymore. Then after all was said and done after midnight, Matsumoto gave the 3 young women 10,000 yen each for the taxi fare, and all of them were finally released out of the Grand Executive Suite King room at the Grand Hyatt Tokyo. Now, there's a reason why almost everyone in Japan believe in the memories as told by Miss A, even despite the fact that Japan is a country that is probably one of the most lenient in the world towards celebrities and influential figures being found with crimes and scandals. If one is a human being with a functioning moral compass, one can instinctively and viscerally feel that Miss A is not lying, of how her story is just so extremely detailed, has all of the text messages back and forth between her and Matsumoto and Ozawa, confirming that such a party did indeed take place, how she wants absolutely no financial compensation whatsoever from Matsumoto, but rather just want to prevent future victims, and most of all, not afraid to testify all of this in court under oath, which she in fact did by the way later on during the Matsumoto against Bunshin trial, despite Matsumoto's personal threat against her to not testify in court. But then, for perfect objectivity, one can still raise some questions, as in how this is still a story that is told by just one victim. And here is when Miss B appears and shares her side of the story. Miss B was also a woman who was working in the entertainment industry. Miss A and Miss B are completely unrelated and do not even know who each other are, by the way. However, the memory that Miss B shared was almost exactly identical to that of which was told by Miss A. Miss B was invited to a private drinking party at the Grand Executive Suite King room in Grand Hyatt Tokyo at Roppongi Hills, had 3 young women other than herself in attendance, with Ozawa, TV writer X, and of course, the blonde goblin Matsumoto. She recollects how every girl in attendance had a distinct look of how one woman was a cute type, one woman was a sexy type, the other woman was the traditionally beautiful type, and so on. Then Ozawa took away their phones and went through his usual criminal routine, leading Miss B to be alone inside the bedroom with Matsumoto. Miss B confessed that Matsumoto forcefully kissed her and touched her all over her body while whispering, "Give birth to my child," continuously inside her ear. And because of her strong and continuous refusal to not have his baby, she had to satisfy Matsumoto through her hand. Perhaps Matsumoto was hurt by Miss B's stern unwillingness to not have his child, as unlike Miss A, Miss B was not even given a taxi fare to return back home. Now, when the article containing the confessions of Miss A and Miss B was first published by Bunshin on December 27, 2023, all that the victims asked for was Matsumoto's apology and for him to acknowledge the truth. To quote Miss A, "I do not want the number of victims to increase anymore, so I've decided to confess things that I have not been able to say until now. I want people to understand that there are still many young people who have to give in to Matsumoto and be forced into silence." However, rather than apologizing, Matsumoto and his agency denied everything that was said by Miss A and Miss B, how none of the events as described by them took place, and how they will sue Bunshin for defamation if they keep this up. So now, why did Matsumoto decide to take this course of action? At this point, Matsumoto and his agency is probably thinking that they can easily just fight this through. Although Bunshin did say that they confirmed the forced sex by Matsumoto with multiple victims, Matsumoto did not know of just exactly how many of the victims Bunshin had been in contact with, and as far as him and his agency were aware, Miss A and Miss B were the only ones who were willing to verbally step up and give a detailed interview, so they most likely concluded that if they deny all allegations and say that none of such events as described by Miss A and Miss B ever happened and threaten Bunshin with a heavy lawsuit, everything would just go away. As after all, Ozawa, the subordinate comedian of Matsumoto who handpicked all the girls and arranged all of these give birth to my child parties for Matsumoto at the Grand Hyatt, made very sure to confiscate the smartphones of all of the alleged victims before they entered into the room where Matsumoto was at, and that no evidences, such as photos of the scene, were taken by the victims. But the thing was, just because no photos were taken, it does not mean that the memories and the anger of the tormented victims are no longer left in their souls. And victims, there were many. Turns out not just in Tokyo, but all over Japan, from south to north. Just a week after Matsumoto and his agency denied all statements by Miss A and Miss B and threatened Bunshin with a lawsuit, Bunshin released another article, this time with an interview of Miss C from the city of Fukuoka, Kyushu Prefecture. The arrangement of Matsumoto's parties in Fukuoka was essentially very similar to how it was arranged back in Tokyo. Back in 2016, a junior comedian of Matsumoto, this time Kurose-jun, invited a number of women for a drinking party at, you guessed it, the Grand Hyatt Hotel. But this time at the Grand Hyatt Fukuoka, Miss C was a friend of one of the women who was invited by Kurose to this VIP party, and with her friends insisting, decided to also head to the party. Miss C obviously thought that this was just going to be a fun party at perhaps the bar or at one of the fancy restaurants located at the Hyatt with a number of comedians. But then again, she gets told by the junior comedian Kurose when she arrives at the hotel that they're going to be drinking in a private suite, as there was a really famous VIP at the party and he could not be seen in public. And you guys know the drill. From this point onwards, Miss C walks into the Grand Executive Suite King Room, and tada, there is the one and only Matsumoto Hitoshi. For the first 3 hours or so, the atmosphere is generally light, with the soon-to-be 60-year-old Matsumoto telling the ladies to touch his pec muscles, and the junior comedians doing everything that they can to keep the laughter going. Then that dreaded time that we know of comes, where Matsumoto starts feeling that primordial need to have babies. With the young woman in front of him, the junior comedian tells Miss C that Matsumoto wants to stay alone with her. The junior comedians take the other girls out of the room, leaving just Matsumoto and Miss C behind. Then Matsumoto begins all his undressing, conducts his usual have my baby hypnotizing routine, and the rest of the abominable acts onto Miss C. Then when Matsumoto is finished, the junior comedian Kurose returns, then gives Miss C 5,000 yen to take taxi back home, while Matsumoto says, well, by then, we believe what you see with this case of, as it is being currently termed in Japan as tribute system for Matsumoto, is slightly different from the stories of S crimes that we hear regarding predators such as Harvey Weinstein or Diddy. The way they all exploit young women using their powerful social and financial position is quite similar. However, in the case of Weinstein, there were instances of him giving movie roles and such to actresses who provided him with the S favors. But in the case of Matsumoto, the very opposite is the case, as when we hear all of the stories from the female victims, they all unanimously state that when Matsumoto was done with fulfilling his baby-making urges, he loses all interest and moves on to one of the other girls at the party. He doesn't provide any favors or anything of that nature to the young women he just took physical advantage of. Hell, it seems like he doesn't even want to give them the proper taxi fare to return back home. The actual benefactors of this S-tribute system to Matsumoto were in fact the junior comedians whom Matsumoto provided the favors with, such as hooking them up with the MC position at a new TV show, and so on. Now, inside this second article by Bunshun, there were also testimonies given by Miss D and Miss E, this time from the city of Osaka. They were as violated by Matsumoto in almost identical ways as with Miss A, Miss B, and Miss C inside the Ritz-Carlton Osaka. And just a few hours after the article containing the confessions of Miss C from Fukuoka and Miss D and Miss E from Osaka was published, Matsumoto announced that he'll be taking a hiatus from all commercial activities, stepping down immediately from all 7 of the primetime TV shows that he was in at the time. On January 22, 2024, Matsumoto Hitoshi filed a lawsuit against Bunshun to the Tokyo District Court. His lawsuit demanded a staggering 550 million yen in financial compensation from Bunshun for conducting defamation, which is around $3.7 million, and demanded the publication to write a formal apology and release it to the public. Matsumoto and his lawyer even specified the type of font and font size that they wanted Bunshun to use for their upcoming written apology announcement. But long story short, his lawsuit miserably failed, with Matsumoto embarrassingly dropping his entire lawsuit against Bunshun on November 8, 2024. He could not receive a single yen from Bunshun or the victims, let alone 550 million yen. He could not receive a single apology from Bunshun, as he so sternly demanded only a few months ago prior to withdrawing the lawsuit. In fact, it was Matsumoto who had to ultimately provide the apology to his victims by saying, to quote the exact statement from Matsumoto, "To any of the women who felt offended or hurt while attending my parties, I honestly apologize." So what exactly happened between the few months of time he filed this mega 550 million yen lawsuit against Bunshun to having to begrudgingly drop his lawsuit in a humiliating fashion? Here's the timeline. Between January to November 2024, Matsumoto made countless attempts to vindicate himself. His first attempt was when he tweeted a photo of a line message that was sent by Miss A to Ozawa on the night when Miss A attended his Have My Child party in 2015. After Miss A was released by Matsumoto on the night, she sent a line message to Ozawa containing sentences such as, "Thank you for the wonderful meeting today," and "Matsumoto-san was really nice as well." Hence, Matsumoto proudly reposted this line message, thinking that this now proved that he was innocent, as the message clearly seemed like one that was written by a person who just had a good time at the party. However, this was far from the case. First, through reposting this message, the Japanese public was able to get a definite confirmation of the fact that Matsumoto did physically hold his parties at the Grand Hyatt in Roppongi Hills. Until this point, Matsumoto denied every single one of the claims of the victims, including having such parties in the first place. Furthermore, Miss A appeared herself and explained in detail of why she sent such a message on the night after being let go by Matsumoto. She stated that she was in a state of extreme panic at the time, and as outrageous as it already is, of how the victim has to feel this way. But she said that at the time, she felt that it was her fault for refusing to go all the way with Matsumoto and only be able to satisfy his urges with her other body parts. Hence, as a young individual in her early 20s who just signed with an entertainment agency, she said that she wrote this thank you message as a way to tell him, "Please just let me off the hook lightly." And most of all, she said that a thank you line message should not be considered as a proof of sexual consent. Representatives and lawyers working in the field of crime prevention were not afraid to raise their voice and defend Miss A. For instance, Akiko Mochizuki, lawyer and representative of the non-profit organization SSO Crisis Center, said, "When a woman sends a pampering email to the perpetrator after the event, it is nothing more than a self-defense behavior unique to SA victims. The victims suffer from self-blame, thinking, 'Is my fault for going to such a place?' Hence, Matsumoto's first attempts to exonerate himself backfired big time and got the Japanese public to be more upset and suspicious towards him. So Matsumoto and his legal team soon came up with another rebuttal of how none of the victims revealed their real name and how this was an indicator that their claims were weak and were only being done to defame him. However, this just provided another reason for Bunshun to embarrass Matsumoto even further, as in one of the following weeks, Bunshun published another article, this time containing the confessions of a victim from Okinawa who was willing to risk it all and even put her real name on the line in order to explain the crime that Matsumoto has committed onto her. She was Otsuka Rika, a former TV celebrity. And what made things even so much worse for Matsumoto was that when he forced himself onto Rika, she was still under the legal age in Japan at 19 years old. This dramatically exacerbated the public's perception of the egregiousness of his crimes. So once again, his attempts to prove his so-called innocence backfired in a way that he did not imagine. By the way, none of the victims wanted any financial compensation from Matsumoto. Their ending message, whether it was the victim from Tokyo, Osaka, Fukuoka, or Okinawa, was that Matsumoto and his junior comedians come to admit the truth and stop what they were doing onto the young women across Japan. And as Matsumoto continued to deny everything and blame the victims and the publishing company, Bunshun, week after week, came out with yet another article of an interview with another victim of Matsumoto's baby-making urges, all the way down to Miss J. This was probably one of the biggest reasons why Matsumoto made the decision to hurriedly withdraw his lawsuit, as if he continued to, well, essentially pissed off Bunshun and the victims, Bunshun was most likely going to publish an interview of a new victim one after another every week, all the way down to Miss Z. But the final nail in the coffin for Matsumoto was when him and his legal team were caught with an undeniable case of witness tampering, as well as physically threatening Miss A by hiring a private detective agency and illegally tailing her movement. Attorney Nakamura Nobuo, who was a close acquaintance with Miss A, was directly approached by Matsumoto's lawyer in person. Matsumoto's lawyer told Attorney Nakamura to tell Miss A to not appear in court and testify against Matsumoto, as if then Matsumoto will sue her personally. There is really not a more clear case of witness tampering than this. Probably tired of potentially hearing the "that is not true, we deny the allegations" type response coming from Matsumoto's lawyer, Attorney Nakamura put his entire reputation on the line to prove that this attempt at witness tampering by Matsumoto's lawyer did in fact happen by revealing his very own identity, as well as directly pointing at the name of the person who made this illegal attempt, Attorney Tashiro Masahiro, who represented Matsumoto in the Matsumoto against Bunshun trial. But again, this was not everything. It was confirmed that Matsumoto and his legal team hired a private detective agency to closely follow Miss A around wherever she went. They were illegally taking photos of Miss A while she was in private places, and when Miss A found this out, she said that she was in such a state of fear that she slept with a knife next to her for self-defense, and for perfectly good reasons. It was found that when Miss A booked a hotel to stay by herself to relax on one of her off days, 3 of such private detectives followed her every movement, and the Bunshun team managed to take a photo of one of such detectives standing literally right in front of the door of her hotel room. Whatever Matsumoto and his lawyer ultimately wanted to do to Miss A by following her to everywhere she went for weeks on end and identifying her movement pattern, we do not know. But again, we cannot blame Miss A for fearing for her life, knowing just how much Matsumoto did not want Miss A to testify against him during trial and was willing to do whatever it took to make her not be present at court. Matsumoto suffered from the ultimate embarrassment and losing of all of his remaining credibility when his lawyer eventually had to hold a press conference and begrudgingly admit in front of the entire Japanese public that the lawyer did in fact hire private detectives to tail Miss A's movements. Matsumoto's lawyer also admitted that they illegally tailed not only Miss A, but Miss B as well. And last but not least, it seemed that Matsumoto's lawyer did not want to suffer from all of the shame alone by himself, as he admitted that he received the final go sign by none other than Matsumoto himself before hiring the private detective agency to tail Miss A and Miss B. And most likely realizing his defeat, not to even mention that he could now be the one who could be sued by Miss A and Miss B, Matsumoto hastily dropped his lawsuit and posted his official apology piece to his victims on X. The posting of his apology statement on X was the last public activity that he has done, even to this very day. And if he has any sense of guilt over what he has committed over the decades onto young women across Japan, and the slightest degree of sanity and moral compass still attached to him, he will not be going around inviting unassuming young women to the Grand Hyatt locations across Japan, whispering into their ears, "I want you to have my baby," anytime soon.